Good morning, Sharptown. As we continue on in our last week of Advent, we recognize we're only a couple of days until we conclude this journey. We've thought together about how it is that hundreds of years before the birth of Christ that prophets had a chance to put pen on paper and look forward to or anticipate a Messiah's arrival. That, in essence, is the foundation of what Advent is about, the expectation of the birth of Christ. That addition to that, we also look forward to his second coming. The second week we had a chance to look together about the characters inside of the Christmas story. Last week we looked out of the passage of scripture in Luke chapter 2 and kind of worked through that passage together about the importance of the birth narrative in Luke's gospel. This week we have a chance to take a look at some of the comments that are made in the New Testament about the birth of Jesus Christ. And so yesterday, Kristen talked to us about the Galatian passage in chapter 4 that said this, that in the fullness of time, God sent his son Jesus. That's not an uncommon phrase that Paul uses. As a matter of fact, Paul also uses that phrase in the book of Romans in chapter 5. In chapter 5 of Romans, he's talking about our need for salvation. He's talking about God's provision for salvation. And then he uses this very common phrase inside of his writing. He said this, you see, at just the right time. At just the right time. Do you know that if you were looking at some other translations, you'd read these words, that at exactly the right time, Christ came. At exactly the right time, Christ came. I remember sitting in a Christmas presentation years ago. The gentleman on the platform who was speaking had a booming bass voice. He stood behind the platform or stood behind the pulpit and he pounded the pulpit one time and he said, "We have an on-time God." And I thought, I've never thought about that phrase before. He said, our God is always on time. He's never late. He's never early. He's always on time. Paul says it this way, in the fullness of time, or another translation, at exactly the right time, Christ came. Now, let me just invite you to think with me. Why was it the right time for Jesus to arrive onto the page of history? Why that time in history? Wouldn't it have been better if he had the benefit of the internet or social media or vast communication abilities? Well, at that time, historians tell us, was exactly the right time for Jesus to be born for a number of reasons. The first is this. There was a unifying language. Greek was the language that was spoken, the common language of communication, and so as a result of that, everybody had the opportunity to at least understand and speak a little bit of a common language. This made the communication of the gospel, this made telling other people about Jesus Christ, this made the understanding and the proliferation of the gospel, the expansion of the gospel, so much easier because there was not the barrier of language. And so as a result, historians have said that the unified language has a lot to do with at exactly the right time. Another reason is that there was a period of time in history called the Pax Romana, which meant this. There were no wars on the border. There was no internal strife and combat. It was a time of Pax Romana, a time of peace. And so Jesus slips into the world in a time of peace. And so as a result of that, his ministry is not interrupted by major conflict or by international dispute. In addition to that, we find that the trade routes of the day, the road system, was as improved as it had ever been. And so as a result of that, travel and language and a time of peace, these three things combined to talk to us a little bit about why is it exactly the right time. And then also, the people have been waiting for a Messiah for years and for years. They're wanting a Messiah to arrive. They're looking for a Messiah, but they never thought the Messiah would be like the one who slipped into Bethlehem's manger. One last item historians tell us about this idea of why it's exactly the right time is that Rome was looking and needed to complete a census. And so as a result of that, we read in Luke chapter 2, while Quirinius was still governor, there was a census. And so God uses the events in history, often by people who are unknowing, in order to accomplish his purpose. And so as a result of that, it is the fullness of time. It is exactly the right time. We have an on-time God. He's never late. He's never early. He's always on time. This isn't the last time you encounter this phrase inside of Scripture. In Paul's letter to 2 Corinthians, and this perhaps applies to us more today than ever, in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 2, we read this. God says that at just the right time, today is the day of salvation. He's an on-time God. He's never late. He's never early. He's always on time. At exactly the right time, Christ came. The rest of the verse is important. At exactly the right time, Christ came. While we were still powerless, he died for the ungodly. Paul says that exactly the right time, right now, today, is the day of salvation. This is the reason why we continue to celebrate Advent and the birth of Jesus Christ. May God be with you today. If you are like me, you have a full schedule with a full calendar of things that need to be accomplished. It's the 22nd of December. Join us tomorrow on the 23rd, 4 services in the evening. Jump online if you'd like to. On the 24th, we have 4 services as well for you to come and join us as we have a chance to gather in smaller groups of people and celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. We look forward to these times with you. God bless. Have a wonderful day.